and that no one could tell him what to do. And if he wanted $500,000 to play in a match, or $1 million or $2 million, that's what he wanted. And if you weren't willing to pay the piper, he wasn't going to play.
He could have lived any fantasy that a man ever had.
In the late 70s, the Worldwide Church of God was splintered by leadership scandals. Over time, the church became aligned with more traditional Christian doctrines, but Bobby was long gone.
Bobby stopped being involved with people that were reaching out and saying, I want to help you. Stopped taking care of himself, added weight.
Essentially, he began the process of isolating himself and retreating into his own world and his own mind and whatever was going on inside of that.
One of his opponents said that he wandered around with a suitcase full of Chinese pills because they were going to be antidotes for any poisoning attempt that the Soviets made on him.
His paranoia, that everybody was after him.
And then there's a famous surreal incident in 1981 where he is picked up and mistaken for a bank robber and writes a pamphlet, I was tortured in a Pasadena jailhouse. And it contains various bizarre allegations.
He signed it, of course, Robert J. Fischer, World Chess Champion. After, of course, the title had passed on. The title he felt he had always had, he never relinquished in his mind.
As Bobby disappeared into seclusion, his whereabouts and his actions became a mystery.
There were always rumors of him going to bookstores in Los Angeles looking for neo-Nazi books, breaking off relationships with people because they were Jewish.
Year after year, Bobby rejected offers to return to the chess world. Then, a teenage girl changed the course of history.
A wonderful young woman from Hungary wrote him this terrific letter, beautiful writing, 16 years old. And she said, what are you doing not playing chess? You're the Mozart of the era. You're the Einstein. You're the greatest champion that's ever lived. Why are you not playing anymore?
The girl, Zita Rashanyi, became Bobby's pen pal. When a Yugoslavian sponsor put up a $5 million purse to lure Bobby out of retirement, Zita convinced him to accept. But not everyone liked what they saw.
He really looked angry at the world all of the time.
That's my answer.
In September of 1992, in Sveti Stefan, Yugoslavia, Bobby Fischer played a rematch against Boris Spassky, 20 years after they'd competed for the World Championship. The event was beset by controversy.
This was the height of the Yugoslav Civil War, and there were United Nations sanctions which prohibited commercial relations with Yugoslavia. The United States Treasury Department wrote to Bobby Fischer to warn him about this.
Should Bobby choose to play the match and accept his winnings, the penalty would be a $250,000 fine and 10 years in prison.
So this is my reply to their order not to defend my title here. That's my answer.
Bobby ignored the warning and defeated Spassky again. He took the money, more than $3 million, and ran.
The warrant was issued against him, which is still in force. And at that point, his wanderings outside the United States began.
Bobby went to Hungary with Zita after the championship. He was in love with her. He wanted very much to make it. She took off with another guy. Painful. This was possibly his only true love.
Over the next 12 years, Bobby bounced around Europe and Asia. Stuck overseas, he missed the 1997 funeral of his mother, Regina.
In the early 1990s, according to one chess grandmaster who knows them both, they were talking almost every day.
Ultimately, he was very close to his mother, and it must have been a great tragedy for him that he couldn't spend those last years with her, that he was a fugitive.
He first now comes back into the public imagination with these wild anti-American, anti-Semitic rants that he gives on Philippine radio.
Well, this is all wonderful news. It's time for the U.S. to get their heads kicked in. It's time to finish off the U.S. once and for all. I say, death to President Bush, I say, death to the United States. The United States, the Jews. The Jews are criminal people. They mutilate their children. They're murderous, criminal, thieving, lying bastards. They made up the Holocaust. There's not a word of truth to it.
He was increasingly obsessed with these anti-Semitic issues. He wasn't playing chess anymore. So this was taking up more and more space.
He said things like all the Jews in America should be rounded up. I mean, it's horrendous.
Close down all the synagogues, arrest all the Jews, execute hundreds of thousands of Jewish ringleaders.
Despite having a Jewish mother, Bobby has never considered himself Jewish.
His anti-Semitism was a mindset. It was a sort of psychopathic illness which he couldn't shake off.
Probably some hidden or not so hidden antagonism toward his mom, perhaps to his absent father.
In 2002, a stunning secret about Bobby's paternity was discovered.
There wasn't a whole lot known about Gerhard Fischer, and when we started digging into it, we discovered that, in fact, Gerhard Fischer had never actually really been part of Bobby's life, that he never actually ever entered the United States.
All evidence points to the father being Paul Nemenyi, who was a Hungarian physicist who died in the early 1950s.
It wasn't clear whether they ever actually told Bobby that Paul was his real father.
Beyond the physical resemblance, Bobby and Paul Nemenyi seem to share certain personality traits.
Nemenyi was a very interesting character. According to one former co-worker who we interviewed, he had a habit of carrying soap around in his pockets at all times so that he could wash his hands after he touched door handles.
He was an animal rights activist. He did not believe in wearing wool. He would occasionally walk around with his pajamas sticking out from underneath his clothing.
Bobby appears to have inherited more than just his father's eccentricities.
Nemenyi had this, as I read, he had this phenomenal spatial ability. He apparently thought and looked at issues in ways that no one else did. It was unique.
In chess, you have to visualize how a board with 64 black and white squares that's filled with maybe 24 pieces, how it might look 10 moves down the line. That's all about spatial relations.
It really seems like there are a lot of parallels in the way that they thought.
There remains one final twist to the revelation of Bobby's biological father. Paul Nemenyi was Jewish, and so Bobby Fischer, arguably the world's most vocal anti-Semite, is the product of not one, but two Jewish parents.
Paul Nemenyi's life and career were ruined by the Nazis. He was fired from his university teaching job in Germany because he was Jewish. And to have a son then who has somehow grasped onto anti-Semitism as a cause is incredibly ironic.
They're absolute criminals, the Jews. The Jews are behind this. It's a filthy Jew country.
The explanation then of Bobby's resentment remains open for debate.
I think my father, at the end of the day, he viewed Bobby as a guy who had unfortunately lost his mind.
A lot of people think he's mentally ill. I don't think he's mentally ill. He's just become mean. He's become rotten inside.
Coming up, an American hero languishes in a Japanese jail.
He didn't know what was going to happen to him.
So he's doing me as a gangster. He takes orders from President Bush.